Welcome to Wellspring on the Air. I'm Tova, president and co-founder of Wellspring Counseling, and with me today I have Kaara Kiddoe. Hi, Kaara.
Hi, Tova.
Kaara, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience today?
Hi, everyone. I am a therapist at Wellspring. I originally started in 2016 and moved away in 2018 to Georgia. And so I'm actually tuning in from Atlanta. And I'm happy to be back at Wellspring. This is one blessing that came out of the pandemic.
That's good. We discovered remote works and we could get you back, so we're thrilled. Today's show is about managing difficult emotions in relationships. I know that's the title you've given it, and I'm excited to hear what you have to say. How to manage difficult emotions when you're in relationships. And I know you do couples counseling, and so you're really pretty adept at this. And so tell me why you picked this topic as the title in this topic. Why is this important?
I think this is important because so many couples struggle with managing their emotions when it comes, because we're always more easily triggered by our partners. And so if there's anyone that is close to us that can get under our skin, that can trigger us, it's usually our spouse.
Oh,
And
it's really true. They just got it. And it seems like, that makes sense because these are the people that we want to be our soulmates, our best friends. We have to live with them. We have to cross them the most. So they have the most power to hurt us. So
Mhm.
they elicit the most emotion in us.
Yes.
So, but you use the word trigger. So let's start with that. What does trigger mean?
Yes. So triggers usually happen. This is what's behind a lot of our emotions. It's when we have just a quick, sharp, radical shift from one emotion to another. And so we can recognize that we are triggered when the response is disproportionate to the situation that we're dealing with. So we kind of end up having a larger than life response for something that is, maybe we should have like an irritated response, but we're all the way to anger, you
We
know?
go 0 to 100,
Yeah.
just for no good reason or no visible reason.
Yes.
So where do these triggers come from?
A lot of times they come from our past, right? And so we talk about big traumas and little traumas a lot when we talk about traumas. And big traumas are things that we can recognize that has happened to us, like what we talked about: physical abuse, sexual abuse, big ticket items, witnessing, the death of a loved one. Those are like big major traumas in our life. But little traumas can be what I call, like, almost like the invisible traumas that we don't really see or think about as traumas. And they could just be relationship injuries that happen with our parents or friends, where we are left feeling abandoned by people that we love, and it creates stories within us. These traumas create stories that we end up telling ourselves the moment we are triggered.
So talk a little bit more about those stories.
Ooh. So a trauma always has a story to go along with it.
Hmm.
99.9% of the times, those stories are not true. It may appear true to us, the person who has been the recipient of the trauma, because it feels true. And so what ends up happening is that our trauma story distorts the reality and gives us a negative story about ourselves or about somebody else. And so a negative story can be, I'm not good enough. I'm not lovable. I am dispensable to everyone. Everyone throws me away. That's why they leave. Every person that I love walks away. And so I'm not worth anything. And so those are the stories that, if when that is like etched in our brain, that may not even be conscious, but we tell ourselves these stories when we're triggered. Because when we're triggered, the trigger is almost the evidence for that story.
And then we tell ourselves that again. So,
Mm.
like, if we had lots of little T traumas in a family where maybe you're never listened to because there
Mhm.
were 8 siblings and there was no, you never listened to. So the story is no one ever listens to me. So
Yes.
then I'm in a marriage and my spouse is just occupied doing something else and I am triggered.
Mhm.
You're not listening to me. No one ever listens to me. And that's the story.
Yes.
That's what you're talking about,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So let's think of some of those. So no one ever listens to me. So sometimes there's stories about ourselves. I'm not worthy, but sometimes there's stories about other people.
Yeah.
Everyone's always trying to take something from me. So
Hmm.
then I think my spouses, or are there other ones? I mean, there are lots of these.
Yes, there are so many stories that in relationships that come up, and I really think that it's important for people to learn and understand what their story is, because for a lot of us we don't. A lot of us, we have never spent the time introspectively to look at these stories that come up. And so sometimes the stories we may have about our spouse or other people is that, they don't love me because of their absence, because of their busyness. So let's take, for example, a spouse who's always busy. You work 80 hours a week. You're not at home. I am the one with the kids. So the story is, you don't love me. Because if you
And
did love me, you would be here.
and I do all the work is a
Yes,
story.
I do.
So then the
I do
one
all
little time they say, could you please take out the garbage? This tiny little thing, and we blow up because
yes,
my story is I do all the work.
I
And
do all the work.
you know,
And the other part of it is that we collect evidence. So the other part of the story, that what makes it feel true to us, is that we start to collect evidence with these within our relationship. So I do all the work becomes fact because I am cooking, I am cleaning, I am getting the kids up in the morning, I am driving them to school, I am picking them up. So all of those things are stacked as evidence to complete the story.
well, it's interesting in the world of evidence, in the world of research, that um, we only notice, and we've proven this in research, we notice what we already believe. So
Yes,
if we don't believe it, we don't literally don't see it.
that is
And
so
if we
true.
already believe it, we notice it all the time. So we are looking for evidence of the story, and research says we literally do not see the other pieces of information that come
Yes.
through. It's a
It's
scary
amazing how
thing.
our brain works.
Yeah, it is kind of scary. So you also were talking, I think earlier before the show, you talked to me about triggers of attachment. Talk to me about
Mhm.
attachment triggers. What does that mean?
So attachment, when we think about attachment in a relationship, we this is really, really key, because all of us are attached to our first, we're attached to our parents. That's
Mhm.
our first caregiver, the people that took care of us, the people that were supposed to emotionally, physically provide for us, right? And
Mhm.
so, if somewhere there, and this is a core human need, so everyone has the need for attachment. This is not like, oh, well, you have it because, you didn't receive love. So that's why you have this need. No, this is a basic
Everybody needs
need
it.
that God gave us, right?
Hmm.
And so He gave us parents, and parents are supposed to provide these needs of love, affection, physical touch. All of those things are part of attachment that builds our sense of safety. And whenever that is disrupted in our lives, whether at a young age as a child or older as an adult, it distorts our ability to safely attach to our partners when we are in an adult relationship, because our sense of safety was uprooted at some point in our life.
So the trigger, when you talk about emotions, that relates to my attachment. I know we talk about attachment styles.
Yes.
So if we had a disrupted attachment, then we may have an ambivalent attachment style. We move toward people and then we move away from them. We want to be close, but then we are afraid to be close. Or we could have a detached style, which is I learned to not need anyone, and so
Yep.
I no longer can connect to anyone. But those attachment styles, healthy or unhealthy, relate to our emotional.
Triggers. Yeah. Yeah, and they connect back. So the triggers that we experience now in our relationships as an adult oftentimes connects back to something that we experienced as a child growing up, some message that we got or did not get. And I think that's also important, because sometimes we think of, a trigger as something that someone did, but the absence of not being in a safe, loving environment, you just may have just been neglected. And so there was no physical harm or quote unquote emotional, abuse that was like verbal against you, but there was silence. and you didn't get what you needed.
Well, and then, we marry someone who wants to talk all the time. And how annoying is that, right? Because we got used to silence. Or even people raised in a home where there was no touch because of some dysfunction. And so then our spouse, in a normal way, is just wanting to be affectionate. And we're like, get off of me,
Yes.
right? So it can
Yes.
be positive, it can be negative. I mean, like you say, the absence of things is just as powerful. But it does trigger in us, okay, now I'm an adult and I've either believed that love doesn't touch, or I believe that,
Mhm.
people shouldn't talk, or
Yes.
the opposite, right?
Yes. Exactly. And this becomes very hard for our partners to even understand. Because if you grew up in a home, let's say, where physical touch, you show affection, you hug, you always kissing your kids, and they grew up in that environment, and then you're married to someone who did not grow up in that environment, then it becomes almost like the person who is affectionate feels, like I'm doing something wrong, because maybe the other partner doesn't even know why they're kind of like shying away from being touched.
And I think that whole idea of what's normal in our growing up, none of us knows what normal is. Normal is whatever we had. And
Yes.
so it's only, usually teenagers, and into early adulthood, they start discovering that other families have other styles. And, if they were raised in dysfunctional, they start saying, oh, other families do this differently, for better or for worse. Somewhere in those early 20s, people begin to discover their family's way is not the only family way. But then when they get married, they still bring that old way in,
Mm-hmm.
and they trigger each other. So you're talking about powerful emotions, because people have expectations that are just different.
Yes.
Not a right or wrong, just different.
That's different, exactly. And I think that is key for relationships, to know that it's not right or wrong.
Well,
That
some things might be, but
well, yes. Some
I
things
mean,
are
if we
wrong.
think it's normal to beat each other, it could
No,
be
definitely.
problematic.
Yes.
But yeah, but different. The point is, different is not always a right or wrong, for sure. Well, listen, Kaara, this is fascinating. We're going to come back after a really quick break, and so we'll just be right back. Hi, welcome back. This is Tova and Kaara with Wellspring on the Air, and today we are talking about how to manage our emotions in relationships. When we get really triggered in relationships and emotionally volatile, how do we manage those things? So for the first half of the show, we just talked about what some of those triggers are and how they can just kind of pop in, and we are so much more emotional with our partners than we are with other people. So if you missed the beginning of the show, you can find us on your favorite podcast channel, Wellspring on the Air, or on our website, wellspringmiami.org. Go to our blog and search in a couple keywords like managing difficult emotions, and you'll find the rest of this. You can hear the beginning. But let's move on, Kaara. So, all right, we do get triggered with these people we live with.
Yes.
And so what happens when we get very emotional? What happens next?
So what happens is we get into a fight, flight, or freeze response. So our brain, when we receive a threat, and our triggers are our threats in this context, when we receive a threat, to protect us, we will either fight, which is in a relationship context, that could be, I'm going to argue, I'm going to become loud and say something to defend myself. I'm going to put on the armor of anger, because anger is one of those emotions that protect us, and we feel empowered to kind of fight the bear when we're angry. Or I am going to run away. I am not going to deal with this. I'm going to shut down. I'm going to be radio silent. I'm not going to talk to you. I'm not going to engage, because I am so angry that it's better to not say anything. And so that's one of the responses that a lot of couples have. And so we have fight, flight, and freeze is where we do nothing, right? So freeze is kind of like, in the relationship context, we're just going to ignore all of this altogether. We're going to sweep this under the rug. We're not even going to deal with it. We are going to pretend like this is not happening, which doesn't help in the grand scheme of things, because when we hide things, they're still there. We know that they're still there. And when we don't deal with issues in our relationship, they do not magically go away.
No, denial is great. Denial helps you through the day. The
Yes,
problem is there will always be another day.
exactly.
I love that quote because, yeah, it comes back. So, all right, we get flooded with emotions. And when we're really flooded with emotions, our brain actually goes into a defensive mode and we
Yes.
stop using what we call this thinking part of our brain, the outer cortex of our brain, and we start going into the inner part of our brain, which is more reactive, emotional, sensory related. Okay, and then we're going to survive by moving toward the danger, fighting, running
Mm-hmm.
away from it, or freezing until the danger passes, right?
Yes.
So again, that might get you through Thanksgiving dinner, but there's still the next day. There's still cleanup after Thanksgiving dinner, right?
Exactly.
So we get flooded and we're not in our good thinking brain and we're going to defend ourselves. So now what do we do to handle this? What happens next?
I think that is so important, Tova, to know that when we are not in our thinking brain, no good sense can prevail. Even the best put together, well educated, professional couple can act as children when we are flooded, right? And
True.
so, and it's because we're not in our thinking brain. It's the science of the emotions. We're not in our thinking brain. And so, what we need to do is get into that space. And so,
Okay.
some of the things that I think for couples, it's important to have a timeout word
Mm,
where, you kind of like raise the flag to say, listen, we need to take a step back. I am being triggered. We know this is not going to go anywhere, but take a timeout so that you can calm down to then regroup and have a proper discussion when your executive brain is back online, right?
mm,
So once we're flooded, we need to calm down. We need to do some deep breathing. We could journal to just get our feelings out. We could just, put it somewhere so that we can like, just not feel the intensity of the emotions. We could literally exercise. There are several things that we can do to kind of bring the intensity of the overwhelming feeling in the moment. What is not helpful is trying to have a conversation when we're upset or flooded.
it's
That
true.
usually doesn't go well.
And the hard part is when we're calm, we don't want to go back to it
No.
because we know we'll feel upset again. And why ruin a good dinner or a good date night, or why bring it up when we're calm and happy? So we have this aversion to ever dealing with it. And
Mhm.
so we really have to make a commitment. I'm going to calm down so that we talk about this.
So that we can return to, and the thing
Mhm.
is that if we can see the end result beyond the momentary conversation, but the fact that when I do have a vulnerable conversation with my partner about why I was triggered and what the story I told myself, so I first need to take responsibility. If I am the one that is triggered, it is my responsibility to understand, to be introspective for myself, to say, I, I recognize that I was triggered and this is why, so that I can have that vulnerable conversation with my spouse, because they're not going to know why we were triggered or what is the story behind the trigger or the meaning behind the trigger. They're not going to know that. They're not mind readers, right? But the end result of that discussion, Tova, is the closeness, the intimate closeness that is experienced with partners when they receive that validation and that support from their partner to say, oh wow, like I didn't realize this is how you felt, this was never my intention. Like when we hear those words, it brings safety back into the relationship, but it
Mhm.
also makes us closer to each other.
It feels like I'm listening to you and I'm picturing people saying, well, I'm triggered because of you, which is not the same thing as you're saying it differently. I'm triggered because I told a story to myself
Yeah.
about you, or this reminds me of this story from my childhood.
Right.
That's taking responsibility for I'm triggered. But I think there are a lot of people who are going to say I'm triggered because you. Is that not right? What do you say there?
Oh my goodness. That is so true, Tova. We don't like taking responsibilities as humans. I think it's one of those things where it's like, it is hard, but in any relationship, it takes two, right? And so even if, let us legitimately say that you were triggered because your partner really did something that was inconsiderate,
Okay.
right? And that's legitimate. Your response is your response. that's the part that you own. You only own what you did. You don't have to own what they did, right? And you don't have to own or take responsibility for their actions. And so that's the part where if each person could only take responsibility for their piece, then I mean, the world would be a better place, like all around, right?
It's true. Well, it reminds me of teaching to use I messages. So I take responsibility for my emotions, which is what you're saying. So I feel blank when you blank. So it can still relate to their behavior, but you're still not saying, you're
Yeah.
mean or lazy or inconsiderate. That's a you statement. An I statement is, I feel disrespected when you ignore my request for blank.
Yeah.
Or so it's still, I'm owning my response, and I can tell you when, and they can say, well, that's not what I meant, and then you have closeness and clarity. And I never meant to make you feel that way. I feel ashamed when you talk about me in front of other people. Well, and they say, oh, I never meant to do that, and you say, well, my parents used to do that to me all the time. And so now I get back to the earlier story and the deeper story, and I invite my partner to love me better than I've ever been loved. Like to do for me what I didn't get before or did get and no longer want to. And so by kind of doubling it up, I'm triggered in the moment by you, but here's the story from then. And it's all an I message. I feel blank when you blank, and that's my emotional flooding, and then an opportunity. Well, why and what happened? Why are you so ridiculously to 100, over this? Well, because it happened to me over and over with my brother or whatever it is, right?
Yes. And isn't that the beauty of what conflict can do to a relationship, is that we can actually learn each other, love each other better, learn to love each other in the way that we need to be loved. Because I love what you said, like, if I never received that type of love in my life before, and now your partner is able to give you that, that is an amazing thing to experience as a couple.
I think we are meant to heal each other's wounds. That's what a marriage is meant to do. It's to do the next phase. Our parents are meant to love us well, and they try their best, and some do a decent job, and some do a great job, and most do a maybe barely good enough job, and some are terrible. But anyway, but that next partner is the next bonding attachment relationship. It comes with sexual intimacy and personal intimacy, and in that one we're meant to again replicate the love of God and heal those wounds and love each other well. And it's like a little picture. Our parents is like a little picture of how God loves us, and the way we love our spouse is a little picture of that. And then someday we get that fully in heaven, or we at least understand God better here on earth. And so, I think we totally underestimate the beauty that can happen in couples of us healing each other and being for each other what we've never had. It is, and it's an invitation. So, that's a good note to end on. So tell me any last things you want to say about handling emotion, difficult emotions.
I would say that, if you feel like you can't handle difficult emotions, or you feel like anytime you try to engage in a productive, in your opinion, productive conversation with your partner, if you feel like it always explodes or it always blows up and it never goes where you want it, that it's okay to seek help. That it's that you are one of a million couples that feel the same way, and that this type of communication is often not natural for a lot of couples, and it does require a lot of intentionality and a lot of self-work, a lot of work on myself as an individual to heal my past traumas. And that's okay if you're not there yet.
Yeah, I think we go into marriage thinking it's all about the love relationship, but really it's a skill. Getting along in a marriage is a skill set. And the good news of that is we can learn it. We can learn to communicate. We can learn to calm our emotions down. We can learn to step out and take a time out and come back in. And we can learn to do it well in ways that are productive in the work. We can learn to speak in ways that are respectful so that we don't trigger each other. And, you don't really learn that in school. You might have learned it from your parents and a few friends, but a lot of people have to learn it from scratch. And we want to invite those people to come learn those skills, right? Well, Kaara, you've done a great job with us today. I feel like this was a really good talk, and it is time to wrap up. This is Tova and Kaara with Wellspring on the Air, because hearts and minds matter.